These illusions pop off the pavement into the real world and are created by this man, former NASA illustrator turned 3D artist Kurt Wenner.
What illusion does, fundamentally, it tells us or reminds us that everything we think is real is in some way an illusion. The geometry of the illusions is very precise, and they are made to be seen from exactly one point in space. Here was a work where I designed the central figure of Bacchus. The work's called The Wine Fountain. The piece is enormous. I'm sure one of these squares is quite large as well. You can see by the people sitting on the work.
Mapping this precise visual geometry begins with diligent planning using pencil and paper.
So here's an example of how I start a picture. Here, I start with the grid, and then on top of the grid, I start to compose using what's called the thumbnail sketch. Thumbnail sketch because one of these horses' heads is literally the size of my thumbnail. The information from each one of these squares is going to then be turned back into a real square, meaning x equals y. And so what we see here is that when we're toward my viewpoint, this is very much like a normal square. I have to distort it very little. This square I have to distort more, this one I'll have to distort more, and so on, until I have to really blow this square out to get it back into a square. Starting from the thumbnail, I then work my way up to a more finished line drawing. And then what happens here is I scan and print the little detail on another piece of paper, which looks a lot rougher. And then I refine the detail on this, and then I cut them together. This whole composition here needs to be blown out in the sense that I have to take each one of these perspective curvilinear squares, turn it back into a square, and when I do that, the composition ends up looking like this.
Making the full-scale work would take days to complete. But Kurt can demonstrate his creative process on a smaller scale.
This is freehand drawing, and there would almost never, in any case, be a trace on the pavement. The kind of chalk I'm drawing with is a commercial chalk that you can buy, whereas the other chalks you see in these different containers are handmade pastels. I do make them myself. Nobody makes a pastel where the pigment content is 100%. I just wanted the colors to be stronger and blend less. So my pastels are made with pure pigments, which means they're the powdered color, the oxides or the chemicals that make the color are the entire content of the pastels, whereas when you buy a pastel or a chalk, it's about 30% of the content. Traditionally, of course, every image is its own thing, but an optimal size is about 15 feet by 15 feet, and that's the size where you get the most bang from your buck. So from the point of view of a person standing at the base of the drawing and say taking a photo, which has become the reality at least of this work, that the image fits just about the right amount of the camera frame compared to the environment around the image and other spectators. People misunderstand the impermanence. People think you do the work and then it goes away. But when you're dealing with materials and situations where the work is impermanent, it doesn't work that way. The work is going away while you're doing it. So it's like building a sandcastle where you get, a little tower on the left side, and then you go build a tower on the right side, and the left one has fallen down. This is the best possible office anybody could have when it's a beautiful day, when the temperature's nice. Nothing better than this office, but it can also be an office where it's rainy, it's cold, it's windy, or noisy, or unbelievably hot. When I did this piece during an event, the pavement was so hot that it was literally burning the materials I was working with.
Regardless of the challenges, Kurt brings his pieces to life, sometimes in a jaw-dropping scale.
This was the world record size pavement art, 440 feet long. One of the interesting geometrical parts of this work is that the bottom part of the work was done on the ground at full size. So while the bottom of the painting, where the people are standing, was painted on the pavement itself, it's actually an airstrip. The part above, where this panoramic part, was painted on a curved panel, much smaller, which was suspended from scaffolding. So the shot is a camera shooting through this curved panel, which is cut out here, and then seeing the enormous pavement art underneath with all the people standing on it, most of whom were the artists that helped execute this work.
Kurt's art has always been a consuming passion, fascinated by how he can plant the extraordinary in the midst of every day.
How much time have I spent in life thinking about this? I think I've spent my entire life thinking about this, starting from when I was 8 years old. I'm 64 years old, so that puts me at well over half a century that I've been thinking about these problems.
Is this similar to how you model your pieces?
Yeah, this is exactly how I model my pieces, especially before, when I was doing them before we had photography and Photoshop and all of that. The drawing is in scale, which means that these grid lines here, each are 1 inch by 1 inch. They correspond to 1 foot by 1 foot in real life. This little model here is about 5.5 inches tall, as is this one. And then this would tell me that a person standing with an eye level of 5.5 feet, standing here, and a person 5.5 feet standing at the back end of an 8 foot by 10 foot image. This will appear in a certain way with a lens which is at this particular distance, which we fixed, and this particular height, and is centered on the pavement surface. And the iPhone then is going to tell me in the viewfinder what a person would see. Now the first thing to do though is to get the focal point in the right place. So I do this by having these two little towers, and I can move the two towers up to these lines and position exactly where my lens is going to be. So you have to let the camera tell you where its focal point is by looking at the image through the lens you're going to be using. Eventually somebody would be drawing or composing in this area, but there's a number of examples of things they can use in order to see the effect. So at this point, this effect of this person standing on the sphere. So here's the image in the correct position, and then if I take it and move it this way, of course, the illusion is going to fold up. It almost appears like a paper pop-up book where the whole thing folds down and becomes flat. This way it wouldn't be illusionistic. It's only going to be an illusion when it's exactly in the right position.
This ability to bend reality with geometry started when Kurt was a young man with some parental encouragement.
My father saw that I was interested in art. He was a mathematician and scientist. So he gave me this little paperback book called The Geometry of Art and Life. And this little book described how geometry is used both in art and by nature. And so that book fascinated me. I had worked for NASA before and had developed certain ways of doing perspectives to capture very, very wide angle views of things, especially planets and spacecraft. When I left my job and started working on the streets of Rome as a pavement artist, I started by doing classical works. After a while, I wanted to do my own original works, and I started to also notice that the works on the pavement were seen always from the base of the work, which means people were looking as much across the surface of the work as they were looking down at the work. So I decided I could use some of the technology or the techniques that I used at NASA on the street, calculating the actual position of the viewer and making the work accurate from that position, rather than composing the work as if it were a wall painting. It was a little bit strange because the first piece where I looked at it and I said, oh, this is a new art form, this never existed before, was the Dias-Irae piece. I didn't do a drawing for this piece. I actually composed it on the street, painstakingly stretching out all of the different figures using geometry and considering each figure separately. Later on, I figured more of an overall geometrical formula which allows me to design the works on paper in scale and then enlarge them. This piece took me about 6 weeks to design and finish, and then in this case the design and the finish was on the same spot because I didn't have preliminary drawings from it.
Do you do this art for you or for the public?
That is such a profound question. Is this art for me or for the public? That's a question that could actually be applied to all art. In some way, I think artists are always expecting that they're communicating with other people. This is an art form which grew up as a communication tool. It grew up as a way to engage the public. The beauty of the work is to consider the environment, the spectators, the public, the point of view of the viewer, and to compose a work which creates a relationship between all those three elements.